Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I appreciate all of you being here today and joining me as I talk about WAVE for a little bit. I want to express appreciation to Jonathan Whiting from WebAIM that he's providing technical support. So if you have any technical support questions, you can post those. Also to Anthony, who is providing our closed captioning today. There is captioning available. You can enable that by clicking the closed captioning button in the Zoom interface. We will also be using the Q&A panel within Zoom for any questions. So if you have questions, please post those. I'll try to address your questions along the way. We'll see how that goes. I may have to queue those up a little bit toward the end, but I'll leave plenty of time to answer your questions. Everyone on the webinar except for myself, you're currently muted, and so there are no concerns about you broadcasting your audio. In other words, you don't need to mute, you're automatically muted. There will be an archive of this webinar that will be posted to YouTube just as soon as we can get it up after the webinar. Again, thank you for joining us, especially at this critical time for web accessibility. So much of our lives have been disrupted and so much is moving online into the web. And I think we've seen the great power of the web and digital technologies for everyone, including those with disabilities. But this is a very acute topic as much of what is posted online is not highly accessible. And we hope that WAVE can be useful to you and that the information today can help you a little bit in making that content more accessible. We know there are a wide range of WAVE users that are posting, that are contributing today on this webinar. Some that have maybe never used WAVE before, and then others that might be considered WAVE power users. So I'm going to provide a bit of an introduction, overview of WAVE, talk about some new features, our plans for the future, and then take some time to answer your questions. So first of all, I'm Jared Smith from WebAIM. WebAIM is the Web Accessibility in Mind project. We're based at the Center for Persons with Disabilities at Utah State University. I'd encourage you to check out our website, webaim.org, to learn about us. And there's just a wealth of resources and information that are available on the WebAIM site that can help you in your web accessibility efforts. So a little bit about WAVE and what it is. It's a web accessibility evaluation tool, a web accessibility checker. It was first developed and envisioned by Dr. Len Casday at Temple University in about 2000 or 2001. After Dr. Casday's unfortunate and untimely passing, his code and ideas were passed to us at WebAIM, where we have taken that over the last almost 20 years and continued to expand and develop it. WAVE, even though it is all uppercase W-A-V-E, it is not really an acronym. It used to be a long time ago. It was Web Accessibility Versatile Evaluator, but we just call it WAVE. Even though it's uppercase, it doesn't really stand for anything. It's just WAVE. WAVE is probably the most commonly used accessibility testing tool. WebAIM conducted a survey of web accessibility practitioners in 2018, and 65% of the respondents indicated that they commonly used WAVE in their accessibility testing. We know that WAVE is used to analyze and check millions of pages per year. There are over 200,000 regular users of the WAVE, Chrome, and Firefox extensions. We actually don't have exact numbers as to how many pages are checked using the extension. That's entirely private and secure, so we don't have those data. But we are certainly hopeful that WAVE is used a lot to improve the accessibility of the web. So a few things about the WAVE philosophy and our approach and what we are trying to do with WAVE. We want it to be easy to use. We want anybody to be able to test accessibility and hopefully make it better. We try to inform and teach about accessibility along the way. So we want it to be educational and informative. We understand the limitations of automated accessibility tools. And we know that human evaluation is always going to be a critical part of determining true end user accessibility. Excuse me. So we have designed Wave to facilitate that human evaluation. Now, there are a lot of numbers thrown out there about how much can automated testing tools do. At WebAIM, we do in-depth manual accessibility testing. So we can take websites and perform in-depth testing using assistive technologies that people with disabilities use, and aligning our findings to the web content accessibility guidelines. And when we do that testing, we find that maybe, again, these are always really rough numbers, but maybe 25 to 40% of the issues that we identify are ones that can be identified by Wave or other automated tools. That's going to vary significantly based on the page that's being evaluated, its complexity, and the type of accessibility issues. But the short version there is that automated tools are limited. Most of accessibility can only be tested and truly evaluated by a human process. With that understanding, we have designed Wave to help with that human process. We designed Wave to identify, to direct the user to things within a web page that are going to need that human evaluation. Now, that doesn't cover everything, but we try to extend beyond just the things that an automated tool can test to help you as a human do a little bit more. Our goal is to have no false positives. When we really try to align errors in Wave to things that we know have an end user negative impact and that align with a compliance failure. It's not perfect. No automated tool is. Our philosophy, though, is to err on the side of users with disabilities over developers. Sometimes we'll get messages, Wave has detected this error, but in this particular instance with this bucket of scripting, I'm going to change things, and that error isn't actually presented to the end user. That's wonderful. And for somebody that has that technical ability to address that issue dynamically, say with scripting, that's wonderful. But the vast majority of the time, the things that we detect are not going to fall into that category. They're things that will impact end users with disabilities. And so we're going to err on that side, as opposed to, the nuanced edge cases for developers. We also know that in accessibility testing and reporting, that more is not always better. Having just an overwhelming amount of information, very technical information about accessibility, is not always optimal for addressing issues. So we focus on the most critical issues and try to streamline what we present to make it easier for you to fix actual accessibility issues. In other words, we want people to spend their efforts fixing accessibility issues, not making tool errors go away, right? We want you to make people happy, not testing tools happy. So there are several versions or iterations of Wave, and I am seeing some questions coming through in the Q&A. I think most of those I'm going to probably answer here in the next few slides, but keep them coming. There are a few iterations or versions of Wave. The primary two are our online version available at wave.webaim.org and our Chrome and Firefox extensions. These provide a visual feedback of accessibility. The online version can be used to evaluate any publicly accessible page because it runs via our web servers. Our server needs to be able to get access to that page in order to test it. It also analyzes the rendered DOM. If you're not familiar with DOM, don't worry too much about it. Essentially, it's the living dynamic version of the web page inside your web browser. So we're not just looking at HTML code. We're looking at that code after it's been fully rendered and presented within the web browser, after styles have been applied to that content, after scripting has been applied to that can result in significant changes within the page. So it's that living document, which is what the end user is going to be experiencing. Now, our online version of Wave does have some scripting limitations with very complex pages. because that content is running via our servers, sometimes complex scripting may not fully apply to that page. However, the Chrome and Firefox extensions don't have that limitation, because that analysis is done immediately when the Chrome or Firefox extension is activated. It's a pure, true, living version of the page as you, an end user, are experiencing it within your browser. Because that testing is conducted directly within the browser, that also allows the extensions to evaluate password protected pages, intranet pages, local pages, content that may be in a content or learning management system that is not publicly accessible can be evaluated. In other words, if it's HTML content and you can open it in Chrome or Firefox, you can evaluate it using the WebAIM extensions. Just looking at our questions real quick. Okay, Colin actually has a really good question about, are there any tools out there that take the results from the WebAIM search and turns them into an accessibility report I can use to give to clients? I'm going to answer that in just a couple slides here. Yes, kind of. What I'm talking about here with the visual versions of WebAIM, the online version and the Firefox and Chrome extensions, really provide a visual graphical presentation. There's data that is underlying there, but that's the intent is for in-depth, very focused accessibility testing on one page at a time. If you want other data, I'm going to talk about some tools in just a little bit that can do that kind of reports. Similar, there's the question, how can WebAIM reports be exported using the WebAIM Chrome extension? We do not currently have that functionality to export a report. And that's not really the intent of these visual versions of WebAIM. It's not for generating reports and spreadsheets. It's for really getting in depth into the page content itself. But we have other things that can do that. So if you analyze a page in WebAIM, this is a visual presentation of senate.gov evaluated using the WebAIM extension. What WebAIM does is it shows you the web page and it injects icons and indicators into that page to give feedback about accessibility. There are 6 categories of those icons that can appear within the page. And the WebAIM sidebar on the left side of the screen will provide a summary or overview of the type of things that might be present. Those categories are errors. Errors are, again, they're things that we know are going to have a negative end user impact and be a compliance failure with a very high level of reliability. There are also contrast errors. Those are instances of text that do not provide sufficient contrast with their background. At least as defined by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Those are all red icons that appear within the page. There are orange icons that indicate accessibility alerts. These are things that are not necessarily an error, but that have a pretty high likelihood of having a negative end user impact and that necessitate human assessment. So we identify those, we flag those within the page to draw your attention to them. So as a human, you can go in and take a closer look and determine whether these things actually have an end user impact or not. Green icons indicate accessibility features. Those are things that are probably good for accessibility. We can't know for sure that they have been implemented correctly, but they're probably something positive, something like alternative text for an image if present, and it's clearly not horrible alternative text, which might be identified as an error or an alert, then WebAIM will identify that. It also will present that alternative text in the context of that image. So you can actually see the image, you can see the alternative text adjacent to it, and then determine as a human evaluator whether that alternative text is appropriate for that image. Now, if you have a photo of a cat and the alternative text is dog, WebAIM can't know that that's wrong, but it will show you that as a feature and will allow and prompt you as a user to do that testing. There are blue icons, which are structural elements, things like headings, tables, regions within the page. Those are lists. Those are identified as structural elements. They can be very good for accessibility if implemented appropriately. So we identify those. And then purple icons indicate ARIA. ARIA is Accessible Rich Internet Applications code that has been added to the page. When used appropriately, it can enhance accessibility primarily for screen reader users. When used inappropriately, it can really destroy accessibility very quickly. So we draw your attention to that ARIA code within the page so you can test and take a closer look and ensure that it's been implemented correctly. Even though we do use colors for these various icons, we do not rely on color alone. There are other graphical components within those icons. There are tooltips and other things that will help users that may not be able to see the icons or differentiate the color of the icons. They do not rely on color alone, which would be an accessibility issue. So that summary panel just gives a bird's eye view of the number and types of icons that are injected or presented visually within, within that page. There was a question, so does that mean Chrome and Firefox doesn't work or not suggested for publicly accessible pages? Yes, the Chrome and Firefox extensions absolutely can be used for publicly accessible pages. You can certainly use our online service for those. But if you have other pages that are not publicly accessible to our online service, then the extension would be the solution there. Katrina asked, is there a Wave extension for Safari in development? There isn't right now. It's not, at least on our near-term roadmap, primarily because the environment within Safari is not as conducive to extension development as some of the other browsers. Now, this is jumping ahead a little bit. We do have on our roadmap an Edge, Microsoft Edge extension. If we can make it work, and the environment there for extensions is new and is becoming more robust, but as soon as we can make an Edge extension, we will do so. Okay, so this is the primary view within Wave, the page on the right, the toolbar on the side. Within that Wave sidebar or toolbar, you can go to the details panel. The details panel is going to give additional information about all of the icons or errors, features, alerts, structural elements, ARIA, and contrast errors within that particular page. So you can see the type of issues, the numbers of those issues. You can also turn on and turn off any of those individual categories or types of icons within the page. That can be handy if maybe you have a whole bunch of one particular type of error or alert. You can simply uncheck that box, and those ones will disappear within the page. There was a question there, can you give an example of an alert that should be addressed opposed to one that can pass? Oh, that's a good question. There are actually two of them right on this screen that are maybe of interest. One at the very top, I'm not sure if I can kind of highlight this in the page, but at the top right of the screen, there's an orange icon. This indicates that there's a select menu that appears to be mouse dependent. In other words, using a keyboard, it can be difficult to change that. Now, there might be some code in there that addresses that accessibility issue we don't know about. That's something as a user, you would need to go in and do that. Now, each of these icons also has a tooltip. So if you click on the icon, it'll pop up this little box and it'll give you more details about what that icon means. The one here on the screen is a tooltip for an empty form label. So that's an error icon, and it says a form label is present but does not contain any content. So there's something there that should be associated to an input, but there's nothing within it. And that, so if there's no information to be identified for that form input, that's going to cause an end user issue. So we've identified that with additional documentation. So there's quite a few of those orange icons that are like that. Another one is small text. Small text almost always is going to be an issue. Small text, however, is not ever a compliance failure with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There may be use cases for you to have small text. We alert you to that fact, identify, hey, this is really small. You probably should make it larger, but if that's not appropriate for your content or your use case, then you can simply disregard that alert icon. There is also in Wave this styles little toggle button at the top of the left sidebar. That allows you to turn off the visual styling within the page. Because we're injecting those icons into a web page, sometimes it can result in kind of a mess, especially for very complex pages. You can end up with a lot of icons and it can be a little overwhelming. Just toggling those styles off will streamline that page. It'll remove the visual presentation to allow you to kind of a cleaner view of the underlying content of the page, the underlying structure of the page, as well as the Wave icons. Another advantage of turning off styles is that you can see the underlying reading and navigation order of that page. So that will give a visual insight into the order in which a screen reader user would hear that content and the order in which a keyboard user would navigate through that content. So that can be really handy. Sometimes a Wave icon may be within something in the page that is not appearing visually. Maybe it's been hidden with cascading style sheets, or the icon is maybe layered underneath something else on the page. So sometimes you can see an icon in the sidebar, but you don't actually see the corresponding icon within the page. Turning off the styles will reveal that underlying icon. Cheryl asked the question of if there's an index of Wave icons. Yes, there is. There's a reference panel. So any of those tooltips that you open, you can click the reference link, or you can click it's a little eye icon in the sidebar next to each of those categories of icons, and that will give you more information in the reference panel. So it'll tell you what that particular icon is about, what it means, why it matters, how is this thing impacting end users, what you need to do to fix it, the algorithm in English, what is it the Wave was looking at that caused this particular icon to appear, and then also any relevant WCAG standards and guidelines. There's also a link there for the icon index, and that will show you all of the possible icons that Wave can present. You can click on any of those to get additional information. There's a structure panel. The structure panel will show you that it just extracts the underlying significant structure of that page as defined in the HTML code. So we'll identify things like headers and navigation. Senate.gov in this case has a header region or element at the top of the page, and then within that is a navigation region. This provides a visual summary of that structure. There's also a main region that defines the main content. And within that main region, there are many headings. So you can see the structure of all of the headings within the page. There's also an orange icon in that structure panel that indicates that a heading level has been skipped. In this case, there was an H1 of floor proceedings followed by an H3. With that skipped heading structure, we've alerted the user to that. That could cause some confusion. And so we've identified that as a potential alert within the page. There's also the contrast panel. The contrast panel focuses you specifically on the text contrast issues within the page. You can click on any of those contrast icons either within the page or in the sidebar, and it will show you the foreground color, the background color, so the text color and its background color, the contrast ratio that aligns with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines requirements, and whether it passes or fails at various levels. There are different contrast requirements in the guidelines based on the size of the text. Wave fully accounts for that. So if it's larger text, which has a lower contrast requirement in the guidelines, Wave accounts for that text size. In other words, it's not going to flag as a failure something unless it's actually a text contrast failure. One thing that's really neat using the contrast panel is there are controls in there where you can change those colors You can drag those sliders around. You can input a different foreground or background color. There's even a full color picker that's available there. You can change those colors. And as you can do that, you can see how your newly selected colors align with the guidelines. And you can see those colors implemented within the page itself. So you get a preview as you're manipulating those colors. That allows you to find a suitable color that meets the accessibility guidelines. So this is some new functionality we've added that I think is really neat to allow you to actually get a glimpse of those contrast changes. Now, that's not saving it to your page, but allows you to find a color that you could then take back to the page. Okay, let me get to a couple questions. Okay, is there a way to adjust the tool to test for a particular WCAG version and or level? There's not. There used to be, and there are a few reasons why we removed the option to limit only to say WCAG level A or level AA. First of all, there was some subjectivity there. We found that some people were maybe interested only in level A, but were overlooking or even hiding very significant accessibility issues that WAVE was identifying. So we decided to turn that off. We really focus on WCAG A and AA. Those are the things that are flagged as errors within WAVE. We know that these things are all impactful, so we really want you to focus on any of these errors. They're all going to be compliance failures with either A or AA, because AA is really most often considered the legal requirement and kind of a foundational level of accessibility. We just have decided to lump those all in. Now, if you are interested in only one level, say level A things, within the documentation panel, it does list the relevant standards and guidelines, and you could look and see which of those are relevant only to A versus AA. There's a question of, does WAVE scan the page? Does it do page by page or the entire website? These versions of WAVE, what I've shown to this point, are one page at a time. But again, it's that very in-depth testing and helping that human process. How does WAVE handle responsive pages? Do we just look at the page in desktop versus mobile sizes? Yes, that's the best way. Both the online version and the extensions are going to evaluate the page based on how it's rendered within your browser. So if you maybe change that browser size, or even using developer tools, you can kind of emulate a particular mobile device within your browser and then activate the extension or analyze that page within the online version of WAVE. You'll get analysis of that representation, that version, I guess, of that responsive page. So yes, you absolutely can do that. Jonathan asks, is there a list of all the WCAG guidelines that are checked and a list of things that are not? Yes, I have a spreadsheet I can share with you. If maybe you might have to prompt again to remind me at the end, I'll post it in the chat, but we do have a spreadsheet that aligns all of the WAVE icons or items to WCAG success criteria. Okay, oh man, lots of questions coming through. All right, so I'm going to skim through these really quickly. These are good. Maybe I'll have John flag a few of these for me. There was a question about, I think it would be nice if WAVE could kind of show what the screen reader output is. Yeah, there's some limitations to just doing that because it overlooks the interactivity that a user would have within the page. So we don't really have that voiceover output. However, if you turn off the styles within WAVE and get that underlying visual presentation and you go through the icons within the page, it's really giving a pretty good representation of what a screen reader is going to read and experience within the page. There was a question, are you available to answer questions afterwards? Yes, absolutely. I can tell I'm not going to be able to get to all of these, I think, in the webinar. Ellen asks, is there a way to filter based on ARIA violations? We do have a few errors, red icons, that are clear ARIA misimplementations of ARIA that are causing accessibility failures and issues. So you can look for those particular icons. Most of ARIA, however, is informational. It's just revealing that. ARIA testing is a little complex. This is an area in the future that we want to expand, is more finite testing of ARIA, and looking for patterns within ARIA code that we know are going to not be good. Okay, let me jump back to my presentation. Keep the questions coming. I'll try to get to as many as I can, and any I don't get to, I'll try to answer offline. One other component within WAVE is the code panel. The code panel appears at the very bottom of the web page. You can expand it, and it will show you the underlying code of that page with the relevant icons injected into that code, just to the left of where that code is. So you can actually get really in depth if you're familiar with the code and see what's happening that might cause a particular issue or error to occur. This code is a little bit hard to see, but here there's a red error icon indicating an empty label. So looking at the code, there's actually no text within that label. That's what's caused that error to appear. There's an orange icon for a mouse dependent event handler. What that means is, hey, there's an element here that has on click, but it's not an element that you can access with the keyboard. So we've drawn, as an alert, we're saying, hey, you need to look at this. This is something that may not actually work with the keyboard. And then there's another red icon indicating an unlabeled form control. So there's an input there that does not have an associated label. In this case, it's a little technical, the for attribute for the label and the ID of the search input don't match. So there's a disconnect between this code, and actually seeing that code with the wave icons helps you draw attention to that. And you could then go back and fix that particular code. BJ asked the question, how do you open the code panel? There's a button that says code. It's at the very bottom on the right-hand side, kind of below the web page. There's a code little tab there. You can click on that, and that will expand that code panel. Okay, so those are the visual versions of WAVE. We also have a WAVE API. So the API is the brains of WAVE. It's the evaluation engine that lives in the cloud, this mythical place called the cloud, right? It lives online on our servers. The idea is you send the API a URL, a website address. The API returns to you data about the accessibility of that particular page. So for all of those icons that appear within the visual version of WAVE and within the sidebar, you can get structured data for all of those. Now, it's just the data, and that's the real power of the API. The API is an application programming interface. The idea is we provide the logic and the computing power. You do something with it. So the API is something that you could build your own accessibility reporting, tracking type tools on top of. We provide the data. You can build visualizations. You can put these in a spreadsheet. You could build a system that emails an author when they try to upload or have uploaded something that has accessibility issues. You can integrate this into like continuous integration processes. So maybe before you check in new code, that code is tested for accessibility, and there are certain processes that would maybe hold up or alert the author of that code to those accessibility issues. The possibilities are really endless. The power of the API is you can check a lot of pages very quickly. You just send URL after URL, you get the data back, and then you can handle that data however you would like. There are two versions of the API. One is a hosted, a subscription API that lives on our web servers. You can buy credits. They start at about 2 cents per request for every page that you want to check. So you can buy credits and then utilize those credits to get that accessibility data. We also have a standalone API. The standalone API is licensed software. It allows you to take the WAVE evaluation engine and put it into your infrastructure, into your onto your servers. So we have really flexible annual licensing with that. Provides a lot of flexibility based on the number of requests, the usage of that API, as well as how that accessibility data might be used. The API uses internally within the API engine, there's a Chrome browser. So as with the other versions of WAVE, it fully renders and builds and generates that final page and then conducts that accessibility testing. So again, you're not just looking at code, you're looking at an actual living web page or web application. The API has support for browserless. Browserless is an online service that essentially allows servers to run in the cloud. And the short version is you can run the API on very, very minimal hardware and use browserless to do most of the work. It's going to generate these Chrome browsers. It's going to do the analysis, and then you get the data back. So on a very, very minimal computer using browserless, you could do a bunch of accessibility testing. We have some more advanced functionality where you can define scripts that will allow interaction with a web page, allow logging into a website, allow setting like browser cookies and session information. So if you have password protected pages, the API can be used to check most of those types of password protected pages. Something like two-factor authentication is going to be a little more difficult, but you can get into your internal pages and use the API to check those. You can also interact dynamically with these pages. So for instance, you could trigger a form error or open a dialog box or emulate a mobile browser and those types of interactions, and then trigger the evaluation of WAVE and get the resulting accessibility data. We have output that allows you to associate WAVE items with page elements. So instead of saying, there's an image that's missing alternative text, we have little output code identifiers that say this is the image within the page that's missing alternative text. So you could use that data to maybe identify to an author or a developer where the specific accessibility issue has occurred within that content. You can also really customize with the standalone API to send custom user agent strings. For instance, you can say, I'm really Firefox, or I'm Chrome, or I'm Safari. You can set the site dimension settings so you can emulate mobile browsers and maybe test one web page using different types of web emulation and testing breakpoints. So you can test multiple iterations or versions of that page. You can also save the page. You can take screenshots of the page. There's quite a bit that's available also in the standalone API. Related to that, we have what's called Wave Runner. Wave Runner is a service that we provide at WebAIM. Essentially, it provides you the accessibility data for any number of web pages, plus a human analysis of that data. So we provide a spreadsheet that gives you all of that WAVE data, the errors, alerts, features, things like that. How many of these are on any particular page? How many total errors are there? You can sort these to get a good bird's eye data view of accessibility of an entire site. But we also have a human that looks at that data and says, these are the trends that we're seeing. These are things that are particularly impactful that you should look at. So that's a service that we provide. It's $500 for up to 10,000 pages, $100 for each additional 10,000 pages. So it's a really low cost way for you to get a snapshot of the accessibility of a page. You can then take that accessibility information and go and start fixing it. So that may be something that could be of use to you. Finally, we also have another exciting tool that's available, and this is PopeTech. So PopeTech is a web accessibility testing and reporting tool that can check accessibility for your entire website and organization. There have been several questions about how do I get reports, how do I get data, visualizations, things like that. PopeTech does this. Now, PopeTech is not developed by WebAIM, but they use the WAVE accessibility tool to do their accessibility testing. So PopeTech allows you to crawl through an entire site or upload a list of site pages. So you can find everything on your site, and then it tests for accessibility and it shows you dashboards, allows you to track those changes over time, to assign particular site areas to different users within your organization. You can schedule regular scans. In fact, you can scan as often as you want to, unlimited rescans, also unlimited users. It's really nice. So you can have, maybe if you're at a university, the developer for this college only gets their accessibility issues. Others don't. So it allows you to assign users to only the things and information that are relevant to them, not only across content, but also across components within a web page. So maybe a university webmaster manages the shell or template, and developer within a college can't fix that shell. They can only fix their content. Well, you can isolate the accessibility issues within that content from the things within the template. So there's a lot of flexibility there. You can also scan pages behind the login. There's a brand new, we're excited about this, a new integration with the Canvas learning management system that allows testing not only of Canvas pages, but also some neat tools to support accessibility for authors within Canvas. So that a faculty member creating a new piece of content in Canvas can do accessibility testing right as they're authoring that content. So you can check that out, get more information or get a demo at pope.tech is their website. Okay, a few other things that I'm going to get back to the questions. So what's new? Well, in the last year, we've released a fully updated design and interface. It's much cleaner, fresher, easier to use, better contrast. I think a lot there that's been really new and exciting, and we're happy and thrilled just with the new design. We've released the WebAIM Million, which is a research project that we have done using Wave that analyzed the home pages for the top 1 million websites, plus a whole bunch more. There's a lot of accessibility data out there. It provides a snapshot of where we're at with accessibility and over the course of the last year, what has changed. So you can check that out. The WebAIM Million report is available on the webaim.org website. So that's just one way in which we have utilized Wave to help inform the broader accessibility community. We've improved our documentation. We've tried to make it easier and more educational about accessibility. We've improved that structured presentation in the sidebar to include regions and better heading presentations so you can see what the structure of that document is and how that might support keyboard and screen reader users. We've improved the accessibility of Wave itself. Now, we've always prided ourselves in having a very accessible testing tool. Many of the accessibility testing tools that are out there, unfortunately, are not very accessible. We've received a lot of feedback and done testing with screen reader users and others with disabilities and really focus on accessibility. So we're always looking for improvements and feedback, but we've really tried to make Wave itself. And that's really powerful and I think empowering that, say, a blind user could do accessibility testing and identify accessibility issues that may not be apparent by doing screen reader testing on their own. And Wave can help them be a better accessibility tester. So you know, those are some areas that we've made some improvements on of late. We have improved evaluation logic. It's smarter, it's faster. In fact, it's significantly faster than it was just a year ago. Fewer false positives. We've really improved the contrast checking to make it more accurate and avoid those false positives. Now, contrast checking is not comprehensive. There are things that Wave simply cannot test when it comes to contrast, but we try to test everything that we can in an automated process. We realigned some of the things that Wave shows, kind of recategorized. For instance, layout tables and long desk are now identified as alerts within Wave. Those are things that generally should be avoided, don't have good accessibility support. So, you know, as times have changed, we've realigned to provide better feedback on those. We have much broader ARIA analysis. So there are many new icons for ARIA. There are new errors when we know ARIA has been implemented incorrectly. Testing for new things that are happening in WCAG as well. And, you know, as new versions of those guidelines are released, we will support and test everything we can within them that we know is going to be useful for people that are doing testing. What about the future? What's coming up? We're working on an uncaptioned YouTube video test within Wave. Unfortunately, because of the complexities of that will probably be only within the API. I could talk about that for a long time, but we want to be able to help you find YouTube videos that are not captioned. And by uncaptioned, I mean ones that do not have human-generated captions. If it's automatically generated, those very often are insufficient. More mobile friendly, we know that's a limitation of Wave on using the visual interface on mobile devices. We want to improve that. Customization of the sidebar, maybe ability to change the location or float that sidebar. Persistent panel states, so if you change settings within that sidebar, those would become sticky and they're going to apply next time you come back to Wave. So you don't have to make the same settings every time. Better document language checking. Right now we identify if the document language is missing, but we're going to expand that to ensure that the document language that has been identified is actually a valid document language. I mentioned before the Microsoft Edge extension. If we can do it, we're going to do it. And in the environment for extensions is new there, but we have that on our roadmap and a whole lot more. We just have a lot of plans and ideas for Wave, and we want to hear your feedback on how we can improve it and make it work a little bit better for you. Okay, a few useful resources for you. We do have a new introduction to Wave video. So if there's maybe something that I haven't covered, it may be in that new intro video. It's available at wave.webaim.org. We also have help documentation available for Wave that can very often answer your questions. On the WebAIM site, we have a testing web content quick reference that's available. It's a one sheet, just quick reference. It helps cover many of the things that I've covered that you can test in Wave, but a bunch of other things that aren't covered in Wave that require manual testing, and it can be a nice reference just to make sure that you're doing more comprehensive testing. We will in the near future have a much more comprehensive testing article resource on the WebAIM site that is just going to be a much better resource if you really want to do accessibility testing to get in and use that guide and resource to help you do that. We want your feedback. Let us know what we can be doing better. We want it to work for you. So please send us your feedback. There is a feedback link right within Wave and on the wave.webaim.org website. So please use it. Okay, with that, I'll say thank you. We've got some time. I'm going to try to go back. I'm going to probably go in reverse order here for just a minute and try to cover some of these questions. First of all, yes, we will have an archive of this webinar. Just as soon as we get it captioned and can get it online, it'll be on YouTube. We'll share that on wave.webaim.org. There will be a link there to the archive. I'm happy to answer any questions I don't get to right now in the next 12 minutes or so. I'm happy to answer those offline. Send that feedback via the Wave website. And just as an update, we're going to have more of these webinars in the future covering other relevant topics for accessibility. So look for more from WebAIM in the form of webinars in the near future. Okay, let me try to get to some of these questions. They're coming in quickly, but I'll see what I can do. Okay, where on your website is the link to the quick reference guide you just discussed? Okay, that's at webaim.org, and then resources at the top, and there's an option there for testing quick references where that is located. Does Wave accomplish the same editing tools as Hemingway and other text tools? Not really. We really focus on accessibility. That's not to say that what Hemingway does with text and content isn't accessibility related. But no, we aren't doing things like grammar and spell checking. There are other great tools that can do that. That may be something in the future that we could look at. But for now, we're really focusing more on kind of the compliance aspects of accessibility testing. What are the limits for using the Wave Online tool? One is just for really complex scripting. Sometimes that scripting doesn't fully take or apply to the page. If you're doing, testing complex content, web applications, I would recommend the extension. It's a little better better web page that's being tested. Beyond that, there are really no limitations. Has to be a publicly accessible page. We do have some rate limits in place. So if you're checking, thousands of pages, use the extension. We have some limits in place just to make sure that the service is available to everyone that wants to use it. Dow asks, will Blackboard LMS integration occur? This is, that would be a question for Pope Tech. I think I can safely say that they would like to do broader LMS integrations beyond Canvas in the future. So I hope so. Let's see. Cindy asks, how does Wave work with dynamically generated pages and where a user can interact with page elements which display additional content like expand tabs? In those cases, you would want to use the Chrome or Firefox extension. So what you would do is you load that page, you'd interact with that page, maybe expand the things that you want, trigger a form error message, maybe there's dynamic content that's being loaded. You get that page to the state that you want, and then you activate the Wave extension and it'll evaluate that current state of that page. So that's best using the extension. The standalone API also allows you to script those types of interactions. So you can write or even record in your web browser what those interactions are. Click on this button, type this text, hit this button over here, those types of things. So you can write a little script, and what the API will do is it'll render the page, it'll perform those interactions on the page, and then it will check the accessibility. So you can do that very programmatically using the standalone API, or you can do it manually in your browser using the Chrome or Firefox extensions. Ellen asks, how are pages with adaptive JavaScript forms processed, single page or multiple pages? Kind of the same thing. It's going to, with the extension, it's going to do that analysis at that moment in time when that is activated. Now, the extension still is a single page. So if there's a process, you could go through that process in your browser and evaluate each of those pages independently. Jared asked, are you a nonprofit organization? If so, is there an opportunity to get involved on a volunteer basis? Yes, we are a nonprofit. We're based at Utah State University. So Function is a nonprofit organization here. And yeah, if you're interested in contributing and providing feedback, volunteering, yeah, reach out to me. We'd love to have some help. That would be wonderful. Okay, Deborah asks, with an e-learning SCORM package or similar, is there a way to test current visible page rather than the entire package? I'm not sure I fully understand that question. I don't know. I'm not really that familiar with kind of the whole SCORM packaging stuff. So if you don't mind sending that one offline, I'm happy to do some research and answer that. Okay, there's a question, does Wave address the multiple screen sizes, ratios, that is responsiveness of the hundreds and hundreds of devices? Kind of, I mean, it doesn't do it automatically, but you can within the browser, you can emulate those devices, you can change your screen size to do certain things to get that rendering or representation of the page that you want and then perform that Wave analysis. You can also do that programmatically using the standalone API. Okay, there's a question, is there a plan to put tab order in Wave like in the Acts tool? I think what that's referring to is actually identifying the navigation order for items visually within the page. Probably not. That's something we could consider, but that is generally available simply by selecting the no styles option or turning off styles in Wave. That will visually show you that underlying navigation order. And I think that's probably suitable, but if there's a more unique use case where having that specifically identified could be useful, that's functionality that, that we could consider. Okay. Wow, good questions. Let me see, I know there's some that I missed here. We've got a couple minutes left. Is the Chrome extension, Ricky asks, is the Chrome extension the better tool right now for auditing my website? It just depends. We generally recommend the Chrome or Firefox extension if you're doing a lot of testing or testing of complex pages. It's just faster. You can do it right in your browser. You know, things like that. One of the real advantages of the online tool is that you don't have to install anything and anybody can use it. You can just send them a link right to the Wave report. And sometimes even for somebody that doesn't have an understanding of accessibility coding and implementation at all, for them to see a Wave report and see, wow, you know, our homepage has 87 errors by this tool. And these are the types of errors that can be impactful, and the online tool can be useful for that. But otherwise, yeah, probably use the Chrome or Firefox extension. Either of those, I don't think there's really any functional difference, like advantage of Firefox over Chrome. That's more of a personal preference. Wave is going to function pretty much identical within those two different browsers. Okay, Claro asks, any plan to translate this extension in other languages or to allow contribution for that? Yeah, that's a really good question. That is something that's been on our roadmap for a long time is internationalization of the extension. We don't really have the framework for that right now. It is on our roadmap. We would like to do that. To make that work, we're going to have to do a little bit of work just kind of on our code infrastructure to support that, and we would need people to contribute those translations. But if there's enough interest in that, that's something that we would like to pursue. Okay, somebody asked a couple things. Can you send us participants a follow-up email with a hyperlink to this excellent webinar? I don't know if we can. This in Zoom itself, I don't know if we have access to that. It will be posted, however, to wave.webaim.org, that main Wave homepage. We will have a link there just as soon as the archive is up. I think I'm hoping within a couple hours, we'll have that fully captioned and online. Okay, can this tool indicate origin of web visitors to a particular site, or does Google Analytics do that? Yeah, that would be really more of a tool for like Google Analytics. Yeah, Wave doesn't do that. I don't see that as being specifically accessibility related. So good questions. Let's see if there are any others here that maybe I have missed. Oh, there's a question. This was posted a while ago. The previous version of Wave couldn't find contrast errors in transition, meaning like on mouse overs. Does this version resolve that? That is a limitation, complexity of contrast testing. The guidelines require sufficient contrast within all of the states of interactive elements. In other words, if you hover over a link and that link changes color, that link, while it's being hovered over, still needs to have sufficient contrast. Wave, by default, will only check the default states of those links. There are actually some limitations in our ability to like trigger a mouse hover within the page and check it. There's some security implications for that. So we don't have that functional ability within the Wave code because it's running within your web browser. You can, however, use the developer tools to enable a mouse hover state or keyboard focus state or other types of states for links or buttons within a page, and then perform that Wave analysis. So this is something we should maybe put together some documentation on in our Wave documentation. But you can say the Chrome Dev Tools, you can say, hey, I want my links to look as if they were being hovered. Turn that on. Then click the Wave icon button, and it will then perform that, test the contrast of those links within that state. So yes, you can do that. It's just not, it's not a real straightforward process. So, okay. Okay, out of curiosity, what is the typical user of your tools? Fortune 500 companies or small website developers? I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't really know. We hope that Wave is, and we know it's being used very broadly, but we've tried to build Wave so it's highly useful by all of those types of users. Whether it's a really complex, full stack developer to Fortune 500 company, or a faculty member or administrative assistant that's doing some basic web content, that anybody can use it and get that accessibility feedback that might be useful to them. Erica says, in the summary with the icons, I'd like to be able to click on one of those categories to go to the details on that category. Oh, okay, so that's kind of, yeah, I like that suggestion. So on the summary, maybe you could click on, contrast or ARIA, and then jump right to that area within the details panel. Okay, well, I'm making a note. I like that suggestion. We'd have to do some testing and see what the implications of that might be, but I can see great utility to that. So thank you for the recommendation. Those are the types of things that we love to hear, things that you would like to have Wave do. So please keep them coming. Again, feedback at wave.webaim.org. We'll have the archive of the video available there just as soon as it's available. More webinars coming in the near future from WebAIM. And thank you all for tuning in today. I hope this has been valuable to you and wish you all the best and stay well. Thank you.